"Go ahead," the officer said with a smug half-smile. "Tell me who you think you are." The words floated across the parking lot just as the morning sun painted the red brick walls of Ashcroft Police Headquarters with a warm golden glow. A crisp fall breeze stirred the American flag above the entrance while patrol cars lined the curb in perfect order, their polished hoods reflecting streaks of pale orange light. Commuters hurried past without slowing, coffee cups in hand, unaware that the next 60 seconds would quietly change the future of the department behind those glass doors. Standing near the visitor parking sign was a black woman wearing a perfectly pressed police uniform. Her name tag read Naomi Carter. Every crease in her uniform was sharp. Every button reflected the sunlight. She carried a small leather folder beneath one arm, and despite the long drive that had brought her into town before sunrise, there was no trace of frustration on her face. Instead, there was only patience, the calm kind that came from years of leading people through difficult moments. She glanced once toward the station entrance, then checked the time on her watch. 7:52. 8 minutes before the official ceremony that would introduce the department's new chief of police. She had arrived early on purpose, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted to see the department before anyone knew who she was. Buildings always revealed their true character before speeches began. So did people. 2 veteran officers stepped out of the station carrying paper cups of coffee. Officer Ethan Brooks was broad-shouldered, confident, and moved with the easy swagger of someone who believed he already knew everything worth knowing. Beside him walked Officer Ryan Mitchell, taller, louder, always ready with a joke that earned laughter from the people who wanted to stay on his good side. They noticed Naomi immediately. Neither recognized her face. Neither had ever seen a photograph of the incoming chief. The city manager had insisted the announcement remain confidential until that morning. Ethan slowed his pace, narrowing his eyes at the unfamiliar uniform. "Morning," he called, his voice carrying across the nearly empty lot. "Didn't know we had a costume party." Ryan chuckled before taking another sip of coffee. Naomi met their eyes with quiet professionalism. "Good morning, officers." Her voice was steady, respectful, impossible to read. Ethan looked her up and down, lingering on the polished badge, the spotless boots, the neatly arranged service ribbons. Something about her confidence irritated him. Most transfers introduced themselves right away. Most rookies looked nervous. She did neither. "Which precinct are you supposed to be from?" Ryan asked. Naomi answered politely. "I'm here for today's assignment." Ethan laughed softly. "That's funny. Nobody told us someone like you was coming." A few more officers emerged from the building, catching pieces of the conversation. Some slowed their steps. Others exchanged curious glances. Nobody interrupted. Naomi noticed every face without staring. Leadership had taught her that silence often revealed more than words. She adjusted the leather folder beneath her arm and remained exactly where she was. Ethan folded his arms. "You know," he said, "around here we verify people before they walk through those doors." Naomi nodded once. "That's a reasonable policy." Her answer seemed to surprise him. He had expected an argument. Instead, she simply added, "I'd appreciate the same professionalism in return." Ryan smirked as though the sentence amused him. "Professionalism?" he repeated. "You walked onto our property without introducing yourself." Naomi offered a calm smile that barely lifted the corners of her mouth. "Then allow me to do that properly once the scheduled briefing begins." The words only deepened their suspicion. Behind the station windows, fluorescent lights flickered on one office at a time. Somewhere inside, a printer hummed. A dispatcher answered a ringing phone. The ordinary sounds of another workday drifted through the glass entrance, while outside the air felt strangely still. Ethan stepped a little closer, studying her expression, trying to provoke even the smallest crack in her composure. He found none. She stood with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years carrying responsibility heavier than a badge. Across the street, the church bell struck 8 slow notes, echoing through downtown Ashcroft. At almost the exact same moment, the distant sound of approaching engines rolled gently through the cool morning air, still too far away for anyone in the parking lot to recognize what was coming. The low rumble grew louder until a convoy of black sport utility vehicles appeared at the far end of the street, moving with quiet precision instead of unnecessary spectacle. None of the officers in the parking lot paid much attention at first. Visiting officials came and went often enough that another convoy hardly seemed unusual. Naomi Carter noticed the vehicles only briefly before returning her attention to the people standing in front of her. She was not studying their words anymore. She was studying their habits. Who interrupted others? Who listened? Who laughed when someone else became uncomfortable? Years of command had taught her that culture was never hidden inside policy manuals. It lived inside ordinary conversations on ordinary mornings exactly like this one. Ethan Brooks shifted his weight and folded his coffee cup before tossing it into a nearby trash can without taking his eyes off Naomi. "You still have not answered my question," he said. "Who approved your assignment?" Naomi rested both hands lightly around the leather folder she carried. "You will have every answer you need very soon." Ryan Mitchell shook his head with an exaggerated sigh. People who dodge simple questions usually have something to hide. A younger officer standing near the entrance looked uncertain. His nameplate read Daniel Perez. He glanced from Naomi to his senior partners, then quietly stepped forward. "Maybe we should ask the captain before assuming anything," he suggested. Ethan barely looked at him. "Relax, Perez. We know everybody assigned to this building." Daniel nodded politely, but something about Naomi continued to bother him. It was not fear. It was familiarity. She carried herself exactly like the experienced commanders he had met during academy leadership seminars. Calm shoulders, steady breathing, eyes that never searched for approval. Even the way she stood seemed intentional, leaving enough space for everyone around her without surrendering an inch of confidence. Naomi noticed Daniel's hesitation and offered him a small smile that acknowledged his professionalism without placing him in an awkward position. He returned the gesture almost instinctively before stepping back into line. Across the lot, a civilian employee hurried toward the entrance carrying a cardboard tray filled with breakfast sandwiches. She slowed when she sensed the tension. "Everything all right?" she asked. Ryan answered before anyone else could speak. "Just verifying somebody's story." The employee looked toward Naomi. "I do not think I have seen you before." "That is understandable," Naomi replied warmly. "Today is my first day here." The woman smiled politely and disappeared inside, unaware that her simple observation had only reinforced Ethan's certainty that the stranger did not belong. The convoy rolled through the front gate and came to a smooth stop near the flagpole. Engines became silent almost together. Doors remained closed for a moment. The parking lot grew strangely quiet. Even the breeze seemed softer than before. Several officers instinctively straightened their uniforms, expecting city officials to appear. Ethan glanced toward the vehicles and then back at Naomi. "Looks like you picked the wrong morning to wander into headquarters," he said. "Important people are about to arrive." Naomi answered with the same measured voice she had used from the beginning. "Yes, they certainly are." Ryan laughed under his breath. "Confidence is impressive when it is earned." Naomi simply nodded. "I agree." Inside the nearest vehicle, silhouettes shifted behind tinted glass. Daniel felt an unexpected knot form in his stomach. Something about the scene no longer made sense. If this woman truly had no reason to be there, why had she remained so composed? Why had she never raised her voice? Why had she never reached for her phone to call someone for help? Most people facing public embarrassment would have reacted long ago. She had done none of those things. Instead, she watched everyone with remarkable patience, almost as though every passing second was quietly answering questions she had never spoken aloud. The first vehicle door finally opened. A uniformed state trooper stepped out, followed by the city manager. Officers across the parking lot immediately stood a little straighter. Ethan adjusted his duty belt. Ryan smoothed the front of his uniform. Daniel swallowed hard as the city manager smiled toward the entrance, then unexpectedly changed direction and began walking not toward the building, but directly toward Naomi Carter. Every conversation stopped without anyone being told to be quiet. The city manager crossed the parking lot with an easy smile, followed by the state trooper, two members of the city council, and the outgoing chief of police, Harold Bennett. The morning air suddenly felt heavier, filled with the quiet weight that arrived whenever authority entered a space. Ethan Brooks straightened his posture immediately, his confident grin returning as he prepared to greet the visitors. Ryan Mitchell adjusted his collar and brushed invisible dust from his sleeve. Daniel Perez simply watched, his heartbeat quickening for reasons he could not explain. Naomi Carter remained exactly where she had been standing since sunrise, her leather folder resting comfortably beneath her arm. She neither stepped forward nor stepped back. She simply waited. City Manager Rebecca Collins reached her first. Without hesitation, she extended both hands with genuine warmth. "Good morning, Chief Carter. I hope your drive into Ashcroft was comfortable." The words settled over the parking lot like a sudden winter frost. Nobody moved. Ethan stared without blinking. Ryan's smile disappeared so quickly that it seemed to have never existed. Daniel felt his stomach drop as every unanswered question from the last 15 minutes suddenly assembled into one unmistakable truth. Naomi accepted the handshake with calm professionalism. "Thank you, Ms. Collins. It was a beautiful morning for the drive." Former Chief Bennett stepped forward next. His silver hair caught the early sunlight as he offered a respectful nod. "Welcome to Ashcroft, Chief. We are honored to have you." Naomi smiled. Warmly. "Thank you, Chief Bennett. I appreciate everything you have done for this department. I hope to build on that foundation." Around them, officers who had been walking toward the station slowed to complete stops. Several quietly removed their sunglasses. Others exchanged uncertain glances, trying to understand how the woman they had just watched being questioned so dismissively had become the center of the official welcome ceremony. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. Ryan looked toward Daniel, almost hoping the younger officer would somehow explain what had just happened. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment, remembering the quiet confidence he had noticed from the beginning. Suddenly it all made sense. Confidence like that had never belonged to someone pretending. It belonged to someone who had already carried responsibility far greater than anyone had imagined. Rebecca Collins looked around the gathering with pleasant surprise. "It seems you have already met Chief Carter." The silence that followed answered her question more honestly than any spoken response could have. Naomi did not interrupt. She allowed the quiet to remain exactly where it was. She understood that uncomfortable moments often became the greatest teachers. Chief Bennett glanced across the officers assembled in the parking lot, sensing immediately that something important had happened before his arrival. His experienced eyes noticed stiff shoulders, lowered gazes, and faces that no longer carried casual confidence. He had led officers for more than 30 years. He recognized the atmosphere of regret long before anyone admitted it aloud. Rebecca finally turned back toward Naomi. "We have the conference room prepared whenever you are ready." Naomi nodded politely. "Thank you. Before we begin, I would like a few minutes with the officers outside." The request surprised everyone. Ethan felt the warmth leave his face. Ryan quietly shifted his weight. Neither man dared look directly at her anymore. Naomi slowly looked across every uniform in front of her, taking her time without rushing a single word. Her expression held neither anger nor satisfaction. It carried something far steadier than either emotion. Responsibility. She had accepted this position knowing the department faced declining public trust, low morale, and years of internal division. What she had witnessed during her first few minutes confirmed that reports on paper rarely captured the full truth of an organization. Policies could always be rewritten. Character required something deeper. She looked briefly toward Daniel Perez and noticed that he met her eyes without fear or avoidance. His willingness to speak carefully when others had remained comfortable with assumptions had not gone unnoticed. Then she returned her attention to the entire group. The sunlight reflected softly across the polished badges lining the parking lot, each one carrying the same promise of public service regardless of the person wearing it. Naomi took one slow breath, closed the leather folder in her hands, and prepared to speak her very first words as the new leader of the Ashcroft Police Department. Naomi Carter let the silence settle before she spoke, not because she wanted anyone to feel embarrassed, but because she wanted every person standing in the parking lot to hear the next few sentences without distraction. The morning breeze carried the faint scent of fresh coffee and damp pavement, while the flag above the station continued to wave gently against a bright blue sky. She looked across every uniform, every badge, every pair of eyes waiting for her reaction. Some faces showed curiosity. Others revealed uneasiness. A few could not hide regret. Yet Naomi's expression remained calm, steady, and impossible to provoke. "Good morning," she began. "Before we walk inside, I want to thank every one of you for being here on time. That tells me this department values discipline, and discipline is a good place to begin." Her voice was clear without being loud, confident without sounding distant. The officers listened carefully. Even passing traffic seemed quieter for a moment. Naomi continued, I accepted this position because I believe every community deserves a police department that earns trust every single day. Trust is never given by a badge. It is earned through character, through fairness, and through the choices we make when we think nobody important is watching. Ethan Brooks lowered his eyes. Ryan Mitchell stared silently at the pavement. Neither man interrupted. Naomi did not look directly at either of them. She deliberately addressed the entire department instead of singling anyone out. This morning, she said, I arrived a little earlier than scheduled because I wanted to experience my first day exactly as any unfamiliar officer might. No special announcement. No introduction. No title. Just another person walking toward the front door. Several officers exchanged quiet glances as her meaning became unmistakably clear. What I learned in those few minutes cannot be found in performance reports or inspection files, Naomi said gently. Culture always introduces itself before people do. The words hung in the air. Nobody argued because everyone understood what she meant. Former Chief Harold Bennett folded his hands behind his back, watching with quiet admiration. He had expected a formal welcome. Instead, he was witnessing leadership built on restraint rather than authority. Naomi looked briefly toward Daniel Perez. I also learned something encouraging. Professionalism still exists here. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it asks us to slow down before making assumptions. Those moments matter more than many people realize. Daniel felt his face grow warm, surprised that such a simple effort to remain fair had been noticed at all. Naomi returned her attention to the group. Every one of us will make mistakes during our careers. I certainly have. The question is never whether we are perfect. The question is whether we are willing to learn, whether we are willing to treat every person with dignity before reaching conclusions. A gentle breeze lifted a few fallen leaves across the parking lot, rolling them quietly between polished boots. The peaceful sound somehow made her message even stronger. Beginning today, Naomi continued, this department will measure success differently. We will still solve cases. We will still protect neighborhoods. We will still enforce the law. But we will also measure how we speak to people, how we respect one another, and how faithfully we honor the responsibility this uniform represents. Rebecca Collins smiled quietly. Chief Bennett gave a small approving nod. Around the parking lot, shoulders gradually relaxed, replaced by thoughtful expressions instead of anxious ones. Naomi finally opened the leather folder she had carried since sunrise. Inside rested the agenda for the day, along with a handwritten page of personal notes. She closed it again without reading a single line. The schedule can wait another minute, she said with a calm smile. First, I would like everyone to join me inside the briefing room. There are conversations that belong in private, lessons that deserve honesty, and a future that we will either build together or not build at all. Without another word, she turned toward the station entrance, and one by one, every officer quietly followed behind their new chief. The conference room overlooked the same parking lot where the morning had begun, but everything felt different once the heavy wooden doors closed. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, stretching across the polished table where generations of officers had gathered to celebrate promotions, solve crises, and make decisions that shaped the city. The room was quiet enough for everyone to hear the soft rustle of paper as Naomi Carter placed her leather folder in front of her. She remained standing while the others took their seats. Chief Harold Bennett settled into a chair along the wall beside City Manager Rebecca Collins, making it clear that this meeting now belonged to the department's new leader. Naomi slowly looked around the room, making eye contact with every officer without skipping a single person. Thank you for coming, she said. Today is not only my first day, it is our first day together. Her voice carried the same calm confidence that had never wavered outside. I have read reports about this department for weeks. I have studied crime statistics, staffing levels, response times, community surveys, and internal evaluations. Those documents were important, but they did not tell me everything I needed to know. No one interrupted. Ethan Brooks sat perfectly still with his hands folded together. Ryan Mitchell stared at a legal pad without writing a single word. Daniel Perez listened with complete attention. Naomi continued, a department cannot build trust with the public unless trust first exists inside these walls. Respect cannot begin when cameras are recording. It begins in parking lots, hallways, break rooms, and ordinary conversations. Several officers shifted quietly in their seats. They understood exactly what she meant. Naomi opened the folder and removed a single sheet of paper. Instead of reading from it, she laid it on the table untouched. This page contains the goals prepared for today's orientation. I plan to discuss new initiatives, community partnerships, training standards, and long-term priorities. We will still cover every one of those topics. But after what I experienced this morning, another conversation must come first. The room became even quieter. The air conditioning hummed softly above them, the only sound between her sentences. Naomi rested both hands lightly on the edge of the table. I'm not interested in embarrassing anyone. Public humiliation does not create better officers. Honest accountability does. She paused just long enough for the words to settle. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity before assumptions are made. Every person, whether they are wearing a uniform, carrying a briefcase, cleaning this building, or simply asking for directions. Ethan slowly raised his eyes for the first time since entering the room. He expected anger. He expected immediate punishment. Instead, he heard principles that somehow made his own choices feel even heavier. Naomi noticed the change in his expression, but continued addressing the room as a whole. Leadership is not about proving who has authority. Leadership is about deciding what kind of culture people experience after you walk into a room. Rebecca Collins exchanged a quiet glance with Harold Bennett. Neither spoke. They both recognized that this meeting had become far more meaningful than a routine transition of command. Naomi reached for a small notebook beside her folder. Over the next 30 days, I will spend time with every division in this department. I will ride with patrol officers. I will meet dispatchers, detectives, records staff, and community volunteers. I want to understand not only how this department works, but how it treats people every single day. She looked around once more before adding, at the end of those 30 days, we will not simply have a new chief. We will decide together what kind of department Ashcroft deserves for the next generation. The statement was not dramatic, yet its weight filled the room. For the first time that morning, several officers found themselves thinking less about what had happened outside and more about what kind of professionals they truly wanted to become. The meeting ended without applause. Chairs slid back quietly across the polished floor, and officers filed out in thoughtful silence instead of casual conversation. The energy that had filled the room earlier had been replaced by something far more powerful than fear. Reflection. Naomi Carter remained behind for a moment after everyone else stepped into the hallway. She gathered her folder slowly, then walked toward the large window overlooking the front of headquarters. Outside, the late morning sun had climbed higher into a cloudless blue sky, casting bright patches of light across the parking lot where everything had begun less than an hour earlier. Patrol cars came and went with steady purpose. A school bus rolled past the station. A father walked hand in hand with his young daughter across the crosswalk, and the little girl smiled as she pointed toward a police cruiser. Naomi watched them disappear around the corner. That simple moment reminded her why she had accepted the assignment. Children were never born trusting or fearing a uniform. Adults taught them what to expect. The responsibility resting on every badge reached much farther than a single shift or a single arrest. It reached into neighborhoods, classrooms, churches, and family dinner tables. She quietly placed one hand against the cool glass and took a slow breath. Behind her, the hallway remained unusually calm. No raised voices. No hurried footsteps. Just the ordinary sounds of a department beginning another workday. She welcomed the silence. Sometimes silence gave people room to hear their own conscience more clearly than any speech ever could. A gentle knock came at the open office door. Naomi turned and saw Daniel Perez standing respectfully in the hallway. "Chief," he said, "I wanted to thank you." She smiled. "For what?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "For reminding us that leadership does not always begin with authority. Sometimes it begins with patience." Naomi nodded thoughtfully. "Never stop asking questions before making conclusions, Officer Perez. That habit will protect both you and the people you serve." Daniel returned the smile and quietly left to begin his patrol. His footsteps gradually faded down the hallway until only the faint hum of fluorescent lights remained. Naomi glanced once more through the window. Ethan Brooks and Ryan Mitchell stood outside, near the flagpole, speaking quietly with one another. Their confident expressions from earlier that morning had disappeared. Neither seemed interested in defending what had happened. Instead, both looked like men confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. Naomi did not interrupt them. Growth rarely happened because someone demanded it. It happened because people finally became willing to examine the distance between the officer they believed they were and the officer they actually had become. She picked up a framed photograph from the nearly empty desk that had belonged to Chief Bennett. It showed generations of Ashcroft officers standing together during the department's centennial celebration. Faces of different ages filled the picture, each wearing the same uniform and carrying the same promise to serve. Naomi carefully placed the photograph back exactly where she had found it. Traditions deserved respect, but traditions also needed courage to improve. She opened her notebook and wrote only one sentence across the top of a blank page. Culture changes one decision at a time. She underlined the sentence once, closed the notebook, and slipped it back into her folder. Outside, sunlight reflected gently from the station windows, bathing the building in a warm glow that softened its aging brick walls. It no longer looked simply like a workplace. It looked like a place standing at the beginning of a new chapter, one that would not be remembered because a new chief arrived, but because ordinary people chose to become better than they had been the day before. Ironically, the first person who confirmed Maya's warning was not Jackson Hale. It was the senior legal partner who had remained silent throughout the entire confrontation. Nearly 40 minutes after security escorted Maya from the boardroom, the attorney walked back inside, carrying 2 marked copies of the merger agreement. Every page was covered with yellow notes. His reading glasses rested low on his nose, and for the first time that morning, confidence had disappeared from his face. He placed both documents on the polished walnut table without speaking. The quiet carried more weight than any dramatic announcement ever could. Jackson looked at him steadily. Well, the attorney inhaled slowly before answering. She was correct. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a phone. Even the air conditioning seemed louder than before. The attorney turned to page 14, sliding the document toward Jackson. The liability language appears routine until subsection C. The wording transfers post-merger legal responsibility exclusively to Hale Investments. If future claims arise, your company absorbs every major financial exposure while Vaughn Global retains operational protection. Jackson read each sentence again, this time without assumptions. The letters had not changed. Only his understanding had. Derek Vaughn leaned back with an uncomfortable smile that no longer looked convincing. Surely this is just an overly cautious interpretation. The attorney did not even look at him. No, it is legally enforceable exactly as written. Another corporate lawyer quietly cleared her throat before adding, if this agreement had been executed today, recovery through litigation would have been extremely limited. We would have entered the partnership carrying nearly all future risk. A silence settled over the room, heavy and undeniable. Jackson slowly lowered the contract onto the table. He remembered Maya standing near the doorway wearing borrowed sneakers, a visitor badge, and the calm certainty of someone who had nothing to gain by speaking. He also remembered his own order. Escort her out. The words echoed far louder now than when he had spoken them. Clara folded her hands together, staring at the table instead of her husband. Several executives avoided eye contact altogether. One younger analyst quietly admitted, I reviewed that section twice this morning. I never saw it. The senior attorney answered without criticism. Because you expected ordinary language. Whoever drafted this expected exactly that. Jackson rose from his chair and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Afternoon sunlight reflected across the neighboring towers, turning the glass into sheets of gold. Thousands of people crossed the sidewalks below, each carrying burdens invisible from this height. For years he had believed experience protected people from costly mistakes. Yet today the person who protected his company had been the daughter of a cleaning employee whom almost everyone had dismissed before she finished speaking. He rested one hand against the cool glass. How did we miss something a 16-year-old found? Nobody answered because nobody had an answer that sounded acceptable. The attorney finally spoke with quiet honesty. Perhaps because she read the document to understand it. We read it expecting it to confirm what we already believed. Those words lingered in the room like the last notes of a church bell. Jackson closed his eyes for one brief moment. His wealth had purchased the finest advisors, the brightest analysts, and the most respected attorneys in the country. Yet humility, the one quality absent from the room until Maya arrived, had nearly cost him everything. When he turned back toward the conference table, the decision had already settled inside him. "Cancel today's signing," he said evenly. "Every related meeting is postponed." His voice remained calm, but nobody mistook it for uncertainty. Then he looked directly toward his chief of staff. "Find Maya Williams. I do not care whether she is in the lobby, at home, or halfway across the city. Before another hour passes, I want the young woman we ignored sitting at this table, because the only person who truly understood this contract deserves to be heard before anyone else speaks." Maya Williams was sitting beside her mother in the quiet security office when the elevator doors opened again. The same marble lobby that had felt cold and distant only an hour earlier suddenly fell silent for an entirely different reason. Jackson Hale stepped out without his executive entourage. There were no cameras, no assistants carrying folders, no carefully rehearsed public relations statements. Just a man whose expression looked heavier than the tailored suit resting on his shoulders. Denise immediately stood, instinctively placing herself between her daughter and the billionaire. Months of cleaning luxury offices had taught her that powerful people rarely visited the service floor with good news. Jackson stopped several feet away, keeping his hands visible and his voice measured. "Mrs. Williams, may I speak with your daughter?" Denise hesitated before answering. "If this is about firing us, then say it to both of us." Jackson slowly shook his head. "No, ma'am. This is about apologizing." The words settled over the room with surprising force. Even the security officer behind the reception desk looked up from his computer. Jackson turned toward Maya. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. She still wore the same visitor badge hanging from the faded lanyard around her neck. He still remembered ordering security to remove her before she could finish defending herself. Finally, he drew a slow breath. "I asked my legal department to review every page again. They confirmed everything you warned us about." Maya lowered her eyes without triumph. She had never spoken because she wanted recognition. She had spoken because remaining silent would have been wrong. Jackson continued quietly. "I judged your position instead of your words. That mistake almost cost thousands of employees their future." His voice remained steady, yet every sentence carried unmistakable regret. Denise looked at her daughter with confusion, still struggling to understand how a cleaning employee's child had become the center of a conversation involving one of the country's largest investment firms. Jackson reached into the leather portfolio he carried and removed the original contract. Colored tabs marked dozens of legal revisions. He held it carefully, almost respectfully. "Would you come upstairs and help us review the remaining agreement before anyone signs another page?" Maya looked genuinely surprised. "Sir, I am not part of your company." "Neither was the person who saved it," Jackson answered. The honesty in his reply removed the final distance between authority and humility. Maya glanced toward her mother. Denise gave a small nod, pride replacing fear for the first time that day. Together, they followed Jackson back toward the executive elevator. This time, no security officer walked beside her. When the elevator doors opened onto the 27th floor, conversations immediately stopped. The same executives who had watched her leave now quietly stepped aside, creating a clear path toward the conference room. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered about a janitor's daughter. Respect had entered the room before Maya did. Jackson pulled out the chair beside his own seat. "Please." She hesitated only briefly before sitting down. The attorney opened a fresh copy of the agreement. "Miss Williams, would you show us every section that concerned you?" Maya carefully adjusted the pages beneath the conference room lights. Her voice remained calm, never arrogant, as she explained each clause in plain English, translating complicated legal language into simple consequences anyone could understand. She pointed out hidden financial obligations, misleading cross-references, and vague enforcement language that created unnecessary risk. Every explanation was supported by the text itself. The room listened without interruption. Even Derek Vaughn slowly realized there would be no opportunity to dismiss her observations. One by one, every questionable provision was removed or rewritten. Hours later, the revised agreement reflected transparency instead of manipulation. Jackson closed the final binder and looked directly at Maya. "Today you reminded every person in this building that wisdom does not arrive wearing an expensive suit. Sometimes it walks through the front door wearing borrowed sneakers and carrying nothing except integrity. Maya smiled softly, her eyes drifting toward the broad windows where the late afternoon sun spread warm light across the polished table. She realized that nothing about her had changed. She was still the same 16-year-old girl who believed every word deserved to be read carefully and every person deserved to be heard. The difference was that, at last, everyone else had finally begun to see it. The following Monday morning, the first rays of sunlight spilled across the glass walls of Hale Investments, painting long golden reflections over the marble lobby that Maya Williams had crossed so many times without anyone remembering her name. The cleaning crew arrived before sunrise as always, pushing supply carts through silent hallways while the city slowly awakened beyond the windows. Denise adjusted her work gloves and reached for her familiar vacuum, expecting another ordinary shift. Instead, the building manager approached with an envelope bearing the company's seal. For a brief moment, her heart tightened. She feared that everything which had happened the previous week might still cost them their jobs. She carefully opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a handwritten letter signed personally by Jackson Hale. It thanked her for years of quiet dedication that had helped keep the company running long before anyone noticed. Attached beneath the letter was a promotion to full-time facilities supervisor with expanded benefits, paid medical coverage, and a salary increase that would allow her family to breathe a little easier for the first time in years. Tears quietly filled Denise's eyes before she folded the letter against her chest. Across the lobby, Maya was standing beside the same service elevator where she had once waited in uncertainty. She watched her mother smile through happy tears and realized that sometimes dignity arrived long before recognition did. Later that morning, Jackson gathered every department inside the main conference room. The atmosphere felt completely different from the tense meeting only days earlier. No merger documents covered the table. Instead, each chair held a new employee handbook. Jackson stood before the room without slides or prepared speeches. Last week, he began calmly. Our company almost made the most expensive mistake in its history. Not because we lacked intelligence, but because we failed to listen. Every executive remained silent. Nobody needed reminding of what had happened. Jackson continued, "From this day forward, good ideas will never again be measured by job title, clothing, age, or office location. They will be measured by truth." He then invited Maya to step forward. She looked surprised but accepted with the same quiet confidence she had always carried. Jackson presented her with a scholarship fully funded through the Hale Foundation, covering any university she chose, along with a paid summer internship in the company's legal and compliance division whenever she was ready. The room rose together in genuine applause. This time the sound carried no obligation. It came from respect honestly earned. Maya accepted the documents with both hands before looking around the room. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I hope everyone remembers something more important than my name. Every building has people whose work you barely notice. They clean your offices, repair your lights, serve your meals, answer your phones, and hold doors open every day. Sometimes those people also carry knowledge, dreams, and experiences you cannot see. Please do not wait until someone saves you before deciding they deserve your respect." No one answered because nothing could improve what she had just said. Weeks passed. The merger moved forward under a fair agreement that protected both companies equally. Hale Investments remained strong. Employees often noticed Jackson reading contracts far more slowly than before, pausing at every page with the humility that experience alone had never taught him. Whenever he passed the maintenance staff, he greeted them by name. The habit spread quietly through the entire company until it no longer seemed unusual. One evening, as the sun settled behind the Manhattan skyline, Maya and Denise left the building together. The polished glass doors closed gently behind them while warm summer light reflected across the sidewalks. Mother and daughter walked side by side, without saying very much. They did not need to. The city around them sounded exactly as it always had, with distant traffic, footsteps, and voices blending into the rhythm of another ordinary evening. Yet something invisible had changed forever. Not because a billionaire had apologized, not because a contract had been corrected, but because one quiet young woman had proven that kindness was never weakness, integrity never depended on status, and the strongest voice in any room could belong to the person everyone almost overlooked. As their shadows stretched across the sidewalk beneath the fading light, neither of them looked back. They simply kept walking forward, carrying nothing except hope, dignity, and the quiet certainty that true justice rarely arrives with noise. It arrives when people finally learn to see the worth that was standing in front of them all along.